Last week, I told the story of Siddhartha Gautama, the man who had eventually come to be known as the Buddha. And according to the story of Buddhism, when he was a child, he was raised in a palace. His father was a tribal chieftain, and they lived in a palace. And one of the goals of Siddhartha's dad was to keep him sheltered. He didn't want him to experience the dangers of the world beyond the palace walls, but also he didn't want him to experience some of the things that might upset him, some of the things that we experience that are a normal part of life, but that can be frightening or fearful or cause worry. His dad just wanted him to have the very best, happiest, carefree, and safest life possible. But as Siddhartha got older, he really wanted to go out into the world beyond the walls. He wanted to see his father's kingdom, to explore its beauty, to meet the people that he one day might rule himself. And so he ends up taking 3 trips outside the palace walls. In the first trip, he sees for the first time someone who's grown old. In the second trip, he sees for the first time someone who is very sick. And in the third trip, he sees for the first time someone who has died. Now, Siddhartha did not know that any of these things were a part of human experience, and he turns, in each trip, he turns to his charioteer, the one who's driving him through the kingdom, and asks, are these things normal? Is this what everyone faces? And in the end, the charioteer tells him that if life goes as we hope it will go, every one of us will grow old. Every one of us will get sick, and every one of us will die. And there's no way that we can escape that fate. Hearing about this and learning about this and seeing this for the first time was overwhelming for Siddhartha. And he found himself afraid and worried. He retreats to the palace, and there he stays because he doesn't want to be confronted with the reality beyond the palace walls. These fears and worries have overwhelmed him. Now, in time, Siddhartha decides that he's going to leave the palace because he's got to find joy and peace and meaning in life. And as the story of the Buddha goes, eventually he reaches a state of enlightenment. And that enlightenment happens after he becomes able to let go of all the worldly things that are causing him fear and anxiety and worry and concern, all those things that are tying him to this mortal existence, including the fear of growing old, the fear of getting sick, and the fear of dying. We're spending just a few weeks on those 3 fears, because while those fears manifest themselves in this story in a very particular way, these are fears that some of us have. After all, if life goes the way we hope it will go, we will grow old, we will get sick, and every one of us will die. This is what it means to be human. It's part of the human experience. And along with that experience, sometimes there's some fears about those things. Last week we talked about the fear of being sick and how God can be with us in that moment and work with us through those moments. Today we're going to talk about the fear of growing old. And what we're going to do is we're going to discuss how we can live lives that are unafraid, with courage and hope, in the midst of what may be a very real fear and real experiences for members of this community and certainly for members of the community beyond these walls. And I want to begin by sharing with you words of a poem that were written by Robert Browning. The poem's called Rabbi Ben Ezra, and he begins the poem in this way. Grow old along with me, the best is yet to be, the last of life for which the first was made. Our times are in his hand, who saith, a whole I planned. Youth shows but half, trust God, see all, nor be afraid. I love this poem because it presents this idea of growing old in a way that feels a little bit more positive than sometimes the way our society looks at it, and maybe sometimes the way we picture growing old in our own imagination. Browning here is saying, grow old with me because the best is yet to be. We do not have anything to fear about growing old because it's in growing old that we experience the half of life for which the first half of life was setting us up. It's a gift to be welcomed and embraced and not afraid. For some of us, that's the way we view old age. We're not afraid of it, and we welcome it. And as we're going to talk about here in a little bit, there is some evidence that points to this being very true, that it's in our older years of life where we experience the very best of life. But sometimes growing old comes with its challenges. It comes with its worries, it comes with its struggles, its pains, and all of the things that can happen. Very real things that we should be afraid of. Things that may come our way as we grow older and as we age. What I want to do today is just to kind of sort through some of those fears. I want to name them because, as we've said before in this series, one of the most important things we can do when it comes to any fear that we face is to name that fear, to know what it is, so that then we can discern what's rational and what's irrational. And if these are rational concerns, rational fears, then what is it that we can do to mitigate the possibility of them happening? If it's irrational, what is it that we can do to stop borrowing trouble for the future? How is it that we can let those troubles come when they come and focus on the joy and the moment of this day? And one of the things I did as I was preparing for this morning was I went through some stuff and really looked at some statistics and what it is that we might face when we grow old and how it is that we don't need to be afraid of those things. I want to set those aside a little bit because I want to talk about some bigger picture stuff that isn't necessarily something we can find in stats and statistics and all those kinds of things. I want to talk about some bigger picture stuff. So the first thing that I did was I reached out to one of our church members, Sarah Folks. Sarah is a physician. She actually is the chief of geriatrics and extended care for the VA health system in Reno, Nevada. She was here last week and knew that we were going to be talking about the fear of growing old this week and reached out and asked if I might have any questions for her. And I said, yes, I do have a question for you. Can you let me know some of the fears that your patients have brought to you about growing old? And she did just that, and I think they're pretty insightful. Maybe you've experienced some of these realities. Maybe you feared some of these realities or known someone who's gone through them. The first thing she said was this idea of losing independence. That as people age, they're afraid that they're going to lose the independence that they've known throughout their life. And for many people, the idea of that is concerning. It's worrisome. She said that people tell her that they have a fear of losing their identity and losing their purpose. One of the things that happens for us, regardless of where our work is, whether our work is at home, whether it's on a volunteer basis, or whether the work we do through our life is in a career or a vocation, often what we experience in the work that we do is that it begins to kind of identify us, and it gives us purpose. When we get up in the morning, it gives us purpose to go and be about the work that we have each day. Well, some people, as they age and get older and they come to the end of their career or their work shifts in a way that the work that defined them throughout their life is no longer work that they're doing on a daily basis, they begin to lose their identity. And they wonder what their purpose is. If their purpose isn't being this or that thing that's defined them throughout the bulk of their life, then what's their purpose now? They're concerned about losing that. Another thing she said is that people fear the loss of function. As we age, our bodies, they decline. We're not able to do, no matter what we think, we're not able to do physically what we used to be able to do, right? We move slower. We might be more prone to injury or accident. Our brains, they don't remember as well. That's perfectly normal, right? We've all walked into a room and looked around and said to ourselves, self, why am I here? Like, I came in here with purpose, and I can't remember what that purpose was, right? So this happens. It's just a part of what it means. But sometimes we are really afraid of how much functionality we might lose, either mentally or physically or spiritually or whatever the case may be. We don't want to become a burden. People are afraid of becoming a burden. A financial burden, a physical burden, an emotional burden on our children, on our community, on our friends. They're afraid of being a burden. Afraid of physical pain. She says a lot of her patients say, hey, this growing old isn't for the weak. Sometimes growing old just hurts. Our joints hurt and our bodies hurt and we experience pain. These are the things that she sent to me and said, these are the worries and fears that my folk have. My patients mention a lot. I had been doing some reading in preparation, and in addition to these things, I found some other things that just keep showing up when people talk about the fear of growing old. Really, at the top of almost every list that I looked at was this: memory loss, dementia, and Alzheimer's. People are afraid of what may happen to them in terms of their memory and their ability to focus and remember and be present. Loneliness, right? Especially for those who grow well into their advanced years, as family members and friends begin to die and their community becomes smaller, they begin to experience this deep loneliness, and people are afraid of that loneliness. Another fear that we hear a lot from our aging community is being marginalized, being left behind. Ageism is real. Discriminatory thoughts and practices that are geared towards those who are older is real, and it happens every day. It happens in subtle ways, and it happens in overt ways. And as we age, it is not uncommon for us to experience being marginalized, being told that we're not as important, that we don't matter as much, that other things are coming behind us and it's time for us to let go. We can really feel set aside as we age, and we can often feel left behind. Especially in this age of rapid changing technology. And we feel this need to keep up, and it's confusing, and we can't quite track it, and we don't know that we even want to, but if we don't, then we feel more left behind. Very easy for us to be afraid of that potential in terms of growing old. And some people are really, really afraid of the loss of physical attractiveness, right? In our culture, we sometimes we kind of identify and we kind of connect beauty and youth, and so we begin to idolize beauty. I mean, there are industries that play on our fear of losing physical attraction that are out there every day trying to let us know that if we use their products, we won't wrinkle. Our hair will not turn that color. We will be able to do this better and that better. And if we take this pill, our joints will work better. All this stuff about physical attractiveness is out there. You know, there are some beautiful things and beautiful people who are young. There are beautiful people who are old, and as old as you can imagine, there's beauty to be found in the way that God made us. I understand the fear, but that fear is one that's really compounded culturally. People, you may not have all of these fears. You may have some of them. I do want to say a quick word to those who might have experienced some of the realities of this. Either something that's on this list or another experience that you've had as you've grown old that's been a negative experience. I just want to say very quickly, your church hears you. We see you. We want you to know that you matter and that your place here is never in jeopardy. We will never marginalize or push you aside. We need you to be here, and we want you to be here. One of the things we talk about over and over and over again in this church is that everyone is welcome, that all means all. And I think sometimes when we say that, we're not thinking necessarily about how we welcome those who have grown older. And I think we need to make sure that we keep that in our minds. In this church, we welcome everyone, from the youngest person to the oldest person, equally and with open arms and with equal respect. You are welcome here, and you matter. We need each other. No matter how old or young we are, we need each other. And the body of Christ can only reach its full potential when every member of the body of Christ finds and lives into his or her calling and his or her place, no matter where they are on the journey of life. If you haven't experienced any of these things, but you look at this list and you say, oh yes, that's a fear for me. My wife, one of her greatest fears of growing old is dementia and Alzheimer's. It's something that's present in her family. And when we talk about growing old, it's her greatest fear. And I appreciate and understand that fear. Maybe as you look at this list, you see that there's some things that you're worried about and that you're concerned about. And that sometimes as you consider the prospect of growing older, you think about and you have some fear. Those are real. And we hear those and we see those. And again, the first step towards moving beyond them is naming them. And if there's any way that we can help you do that, we're here for you in the midst of that journey. What I want to do now is I kind of want to move away from our fears of growing old. I want to move away from talking about those worries and concerns that we may have, and I want to talk about how we push through those things by talking about some of the advantages, some of the gifts, some of the things that we can look forward to when it comes to growing old. And again, we're going to look at this big picture kind of way. And I want to start with something that was in Adam Hamilton's book that's been at the heart of our conversation for the last several weeks. Because when I read this, it really got my attention, and it surprised me. Maybe you know this information, but for me it was new and it was rather surprising. The Nielsen Group did a massive study on well-being and happiness. Who feels happy and who rates their well-being at a high level? And so it was a rating scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, 1 being the lowest. And they just asked, report your sense of well-being and happiness. They've got this chart that kind of tracks it, and I want to show it to you here real quickly. So here's where the chart starts, in our late teens. And in our late teens, there is a decline. They've discovered a decline in terms of well-being and happiness. And we've talked about this a little bit before, and this isn't unusual. In between 18 and 21, those early years of adolescence, there's a lot of change going on in life. We're leaving home. We're either starting our work lives or we're going to school. We're beginning to recognize the realities, the responsibilities, the burdens, the kind of being out there on our own. And there's a reason that there's kind of a decline in our sense of well-being. And if you know an adolescent person, you might have seen this. They're a little shaken by what's happening at that point in their life. So overall sense of well-being, once we move out of home, it starts to shift a little bit. It starts to drop on the whole, on average. Then in our mid-20s, things start to go up a little bit. What's happening here in our mid-20s? We're getting our legs underneath us. We're kind of starting to figure it out. We're even starting to have a little fun. We might fall in love. We might find a partner. We might have children and live into a dream that we had of having a family. There's all kinds of things that are happening in this moment. And so our happiness, our well-being starts to rise. And then what happens in our mid-30s? Our kids become teenagers. While it can be difficult, while the teenage years are difficult, and remember, as hard as it may be to parent a teenager, it's a lot harder to be a teenager, right? It can be tough to be teenagers. And having teens at home is not the full reason why that goes down. There are all kinds of other reasons, right? This is a part in our life where now we're not just new to the workforce, we've been at it a while. And we're starting to experience, sometimes you got to get up and go when you don't want to get up and go. There are other stresses and burdens that come our way. As our kids do become teenagers, we begin to think about the prospect of them moving out of home. If they want to go to college, how are we going to fund that? We start to pay attention to our own retirement and what that may or may not look like and how prepared we are or are not. Our parents may be aging in a way that's requiring us to engage with them in a new way. They used to use this word all the time, the sandwich generation, this generation that's in between, and sometimes that can create some stresses in life. I'm 47, and as I look at this chart and I see this trend going down, I resonate with it. And for me, it was kind of helpful because it named it. If I were to report my well-being, it'd be pretty good. At the same time, this is not the happiest point of my life. There have been some stresses, there have been some struggles, and there's some things that we're working through that are just a part of kind of being in your older 40s and your lower 50s and what that looks like. And when I saw this, I thought, oh, God, well, one, I'm not alone, and there's hope, right? Because guess what happens here in your early 50s? Your kids move out. Right? So your kids move out and they start finding their direction. Now, this is hard. Being an empty nester, and I've talked about this because our son has just gone off to college for his first year, and there's some moments where it's a real struggle, and a struggle with it, and there's a loneliness and a sadness there. At the same time, having just one kid at home is awesome. And it's freed us up in a way as a family that's allowed Carrie and I to focus on our relationship. We've been able to do some things together that we have not been able to do as our children were young, as we were raising them. And it's been such a joy to get to rekindle that relationship in that way. I'm forming a new relationship with my oldest son, an adult relationship with a phenomenal young man. And as much as I loved raising him as a child, getting to know him as an adult, Oh, it's so beautiful. So we already talk about what are we going to do when the second one's gone, right? And we got plans, buddy. We got plans. And they're good plans, and I'm really looking forward to it. And when I look at this, it starts to make sense for me that as we start to age, kind of our well-being, people start to report higher sense of well-being. And by the mid-70s, we've now reached that place where we were at our happiest in our youth, right? And the older we get, it just continues to go up and get better and better. And there's some reasons for this. And as they did this research, they wrote down, they made note of all the reasons why people would report their well-being a little bit higher. And I want to share some of those with you because they give me hope, and maybe they'll give you hope. As you grow old, you become more appreciative of what you have. You don't take relationships for granted. You don't take your health for granted. You don't take the things that you have for granted as much. You have more time to spend with friends and family, more time for hobbies, travel, and other activities. There's less pressure to meet others' expectations. Your give-a-care factor about others' impressions of you begins to drop and reduce a little bit, right? Because you're not as worried about what they think of you. They say that older folks tend to have more positive emotions. They don't get as focused on the negative as often. That life experience leads the older person to having better ability to handle adversity. Why? Because they've been through adversity. They've gone through it, and they've recognized that they can get to the other side. And so they're not as daunted when they face something hard. They're not as daunted when they face something difficult. They're able to kind of weather the storm a little bit because they've been there and they've done that. Or maybe there's other joys that you've experienced as you've grown old, and maybe each one of these isn't something that you've known, but this is why Browning wrote, "Grow old with me, for the best is yet to be." The first half is what has set the stage for the second half. And that's the whole picture. And I think that Browning is on to something. Yes, there are certainly some things that might cause us fear. There might be some difficulties as we age, but there are some things that we can really look forward to. I want to share with you some things that come from Scripture that talk about growing old and how we do that in a way that gives us hope and courage. And the first passage that I want to share with you comes from the prophet Joel, and God is speaking through Joel a really important thing for all of us to remember. This is so important, in fact, that when Peter preaches on the day of Pentecost, one of the most important sermons in Christian history, in Acts 2, when he preaches on Pentecost, he quotes this passage from Joel. That's how important it is. It was at the very center of the beginning of the Christian faith. "Then afterward I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh. Your sons and daughters shall prophesy. Your old men and women shall dream dreams, and your young men and women shall see visions." I love this passage because, one, it reminds us that there is wisdom and vision and passion and dreams in our young people. And those are Spirit-led, and we want to see that, and we want to live into that, and we want to experience that joy of their dreams for their future. But dreams and visions aren't just limited to the young. Dreams and visions can be in us and can be given to us by God no matter our age. And even if we're at the peak of old age, God is still speaking to us and still giving us dreams and visions. And God's giving us purpose. Look at the story of Scripture. Over and over and over again, when there are moments when the people of God need someone to come in and lead them to a new place, who does God choose? Senior citizens to lead the people of God with vision and hope and courage. Noah was old when God gave him the vision to build the ark. Abraham, 75. Sarah, 65. When God told them that they were going to give birth to a child who would become the nation of Israel. Moses, when God spoke to Moses at the burning bush and told him to return to Egypt, Moses was 80. Elizabeth, the mother of John the Baptist, the comforter of Jesus' mother Mary, when she found out she was pregnant, we are told that Elizabeth was very old when she became pregnant. Naomi is an older mentor in the book of Ruth who guides and shapes Ruth. Many people see Ruth as the center character, as a central character in the story, and the book is named after her. But Naomi plays a foundational role in that book, and Naomi and her wisdom come from her old age. You see, for God, no matter how old we are, God can give us purpose, and God can give us identity, and God has a ministry for you in your old age. No matter what that ministry may look like, no matter how small it may be, God has a ministry for you, and God is calling you because God knows that you can make a difference in the world, not just in spite of your age, but because your age and through your age. I want to share one final passage with you. This passage comes from the prophet Isaiah, and it speaks to something we've talked about throughout this entire series. Even to your old age and gray hairs, I am God. I will sustain you. I have made you, and I will carry you. I will sustain you, and I will rescue you. Every week, we've come back to this idea. Every week, as we've talked about our fears and our concerns and our worries, every week we've come back to a passage and a promise of Scripture. And the promise is this: we are not alone. God is with us no matter what we face in life, no matter what our fears are, no matter what our struggles are, no matter whether we're young or old. God is always in our midst, and we are not alone. Again, as we've said, that doesn't just make all our fears and all our worries and all the struggles that we may face go away. But if we can rest in that promise, it can turn those fears down just a little bit. Here's my hope for us. My hope for us is that whether or not we are afraid of the future, whether or not we worry about growing old, that we can find a way to live our lives with courage and hope. That we can be in a place where we aren't so much afraid as we might have been. Because there is beauty and gift and life in growing old. It's been ordained and created and blessed by God. If things work out the way we hope they'll work out, we're all going to grow old. I don't know about you, but this week's given me some hope and something to look forward in that journey. And I pray that as we live into it, we can do so boldly, with faith, with vision, with dreams, and with purpose. Amen.